Today, I'm going to discuss some concepts like Sanskritization, parochialization, universalization, and globalization, which are used in the study of civilization. The post-independence period in India witnessed a shift in the domain of anthropology as a discipline. After taking up the folk and peasant communities, the social anthropologists started the study of traditional and modern cities and other more complex segments of Indian population to understand the interaction between the great and little traditions and as dimensions of Indian civilization without losing their identity as anthropologists. The role of caste in politics has also attracted the attention of social anthropologists, and much of the empirical research on caste deals with the relationship between castes, status, power, stratification, and economic dimensions of these factors. Several useful studies of the processes of Sanskritization, parochialization, universalization, and globalization have been undertaken. Before attempting to observe the operation of these processes in a society, it is important to have a clear understanding of the terms and concepts used in the study. Redfield and Singer have been deeply concerned with the theoretical and methodological problems of studying a civilization. Redfield develops his propositions about civilization on the concepts of great and little traditions, cultural specialists, style of life, cultural performances, and cultural media. With the village as the point of reference, the higher and intellectual influences that come from the outside are termed the great tradition, and those that come from within the village are termed the little tradition. In his methodological study in India, Singer applies some of Redfield's views to the study of Indian civilization. He examines Redfield's concept of cultural specialists in Indian situations and formulates some other concepts like cultural media, cultural performances, and cultural stages. He makes a distinction between the unit of cogitation and the unit of observation. He calls such units of observation as prayers, rituals, recitations, rites and ceremonies, cultural performances, and the places where the cultural performances occur, cultural stages. They may occur in the home or in the temple or in any other sacred or secular place under a separate priesthood. He further suggests that concepts like great and little traditions or social organization of traditions can be formulated on more abstract levels. Sanskritization. The concept of Sanskritization was put forth by M.N. Srinivas in his book Social Change in Modern India. According to him, Sanskritization represents actual or aspired for cultural mobility within the framework of the established great tradition and stratification system of caste. Through Sanskritization, a caste or a tribal community ventures to gain higher status in society. There is a constant effort on the part of the lower placed groups in the caste hierarchy to raise their status as a group by Sanskritizing their rituals and beliefs. In Sanskritization, a low caste takes to the conduct by imitating the customs and rituals characteristic of the high castes with the belief that they would qualify for being treated as twice born. The process of Sanskritization is found not only in castes but also in tribal communities. To prove his point, Srinivas gives examples from caste groups and tribal groups. The Lingayats of Mysore had Sanskritized their way of life over 8 centuries ago. In recent times, Sanskritization has been widespread both spatially as well as structurally. The Ramgharyas of Punjab, the Chamars of Uttar Pradesh, the Orauns of Bihar, the Bhils of Rajasthan, and the Gonds of Madhya Pradesh have all tried to Sanskritize their way of life. Srinivas further explains that it is not just the desire to raise one's status in the social hierarchy that affects Sanskritization, but other factors that have contributed to Sanskritization are the spread in education, improvement in the means of communication, and other modern values introduced by the British rulers. Parochialization. The concepts of universalization and parochialization were put forth by Mackim Marriott in his Little Communities in an Indigenous Civilization as a sequel to Robert Redfield's Great Tradition and Little Tradition. Mackim Marriott defines parochialization as a process of localization, of limitation upon the scope of intelligibility, of deprivation of literary form, of reduction to less systematic and less reflective dimensions. The process of parochialization constitutes the characteristic creative work of little communities within India's indigenous civilization. It is a downward de-evolutionary process. He explains the process of parochialization as the reverse of universalization with examples of festivals from Kishan Garhi village in Uttar Pradesh, where the worship of Lord Krishna, the cow nourisher or Govardhan, has been parochialized into a crude form. What is cow nourisher worship has turned into cow dung wealth worship. That is, Go plus Vardhana has been crudely transmitted to Gobar plus Dhana. The sacred hill at Kishangarhi is nothing but a pile of cow dung decorated for the ritual enactment. Another example of parochialization comes from the festival of Navratri, in which 9 Durgas are worshipped for 9 successive days. In Kishangarhi, a female deity called Northa, made of mud, is worshipped for 9 deities. Marriott points out that the Durga has been parochialized into Northa, the name itself being a parochialized term deriving from Navratra or 9 nights. Thus, Marriott concludes that, seen through its festivals and deities, the religion of the village of Kishangarhi may be conceived as resulting from a continuous process of communication between a little local tradition and great traditions which have their places partly inside and partly outside the village. Since both great and little traditions exist within the religion of little communities and these communities communicate, study of the religion of a little community can contribute to understanding of processes of universalization and parochialization which are generally operative in Indian civilization. Universalization. As stated above, by universalization, Marriott refers to the carrying forward of materials which are already present in the little tradition, which it encompasses. He is of the opinion that an indigenous civilization is one whose great tradition originates by universalization and that this process is not restricted to the Hindu culture, but applicable to all cultures having the dimensions of the great and little traditions. Marriott explains the process of universalization by giving examples from the festivals of the little tradition in Kishangarhi village. He refers to the festival of lights in which the local goddess of prosperity and wealth named Sorti is propitiated. He comments that Sorti of this little tradition could have been universalized into Goddess Lakshmi of the great tradition who stands for prosperity and wealth as well. Similarly, he feels that the festival of charm tying, in which sisters tie a charm around their brothers' wrists and exchange sweets for gifts, could have been universalized into Raksha Bandhan festival. Recent village studies in India reveal that the Indian village is not an isolated, self-sufficient social unit. Rather, it is tied to the wider society and culture by many ties of marriage, caste, trade, religion, and politics. This discovery is producing a kind of research that gives considerable support to the conception of Indian civilization as a coherent structure of rural networks and urban centers, which at the same time acts as a medium for the mutual communication of great and little traditions and of other cultural differences between and among tribes and castes, linguistic regions, regions and center, town and country. On the one hand, kinship networks imparting generation after generation the ingredients of the particular tradition to its constituent family members, being carriers of culture, and on the other hand, the extending horizons of kinship networks outside the villages to cities serve to propagate the little tradition of the village among the followers of the great tradition in the cities. Thus, there is a constant process of universalization and parochialization in this regard. Globalization. Globalization is not a new phenomenon as it is all about connectivity, but it certainly has some specific characteristics in the present era. Contemporary globalization is the increasing flow of trade, finance, culture, ideas, and people brought about by the sophisticated technology of communications and travels and by the worldwide spread of neoliberal capitalism. The current phase of globalization may be conceived as ideology or as theory and also as empirical fact. Barrett in 1999 stated that human society is in the process of being transformed to a degree possibly not seen since the Industrial Revolution. Significant restructuring in three basic fields due to globalization is taking place in contemporary times. The first concerns change in economic life, the second concerns change in power and polity, and the third concerns change in knowledge and identity. The economic, political, and social complexities of recent times are manifested in various ways. A global crisis has been associated with environmental degradation, breaking up of Eastern Europe, graying of industrial societies, unipolar superpower, AIDS epidemic, worldwide ethnic conflicts, communal violence, terrorism, identity, politics, and so on. To understand and examine the social complexities of recent times, the key word globalization has been used as a dominant political and academic discourse. Of the various dimensions of globalization, cultural globalization has attracted much attention of the anthropologists and sociologists. Cultural globalization is the process which creates a global culture based on the values of multiculturalism and democracy. The absolute globalization of culture would involve the creation of a common value, taste, and style of life. The most basic issue in cultural globalization is whose culture acquires a global spread and whose not. Under such a context, it is difficult to ignore the issue of cultural imposition and domination of the developed West. Cultural aspects of globalization are tied up with modernity. Most commonly, it is assumed that it is spreading from the West and produces uniformity and standardization through technological, commercial, and cultural synchronization. Cultural communication exposes the communicators to foreign influences. The most relevant anthropological concept which helps in understanding cultural globalization is the concept of cultural contact or diffusion. In the era of cultural globalization, the basic concept of culture as shared patterns of learned belief and behavior constituting the total way of life of a group of people, the totality of tools, acts, thoughts and institutions of any given human population has also been changing. Culture as a particularistic and localized phenomenon is fast becoming outdated with the increasing penetration of external elements of non-integrated traits accumulated through the process of globalization. A large number of people of a given culture are now residing outside their fixed territory. Earlier, the people had been creators and creatures of culture. But today, the corporate bodies and media have emerged as the creators and carriers of culture. Nonetheless, globalization has created a section of loser along with a section of gainer across society and culture in the global world. Conclusion. It, therefore, may be concluded that the growth of Indian anthropology was greatly influenced by the American social or cultural anthropologists who took up village and caste studies along with studies on the dimensions of Indian civilization. The concept of Sanskritization put forth by M.N. Srinivas, which represents actual or aspired for cultural mobility within the framework of the established great tradition and stratification system of caste, has helped anthropologists to a great deal in studying Indian civilization. The importance of studying the religion of a little community to understand the processes of universalization and parochialization which operate in Indian civilization has been stressed by McKim Marriott. Globalization being a process of connectivity and of increasing interdependence of world society into a single whole, its operation also needs to be taken into consideration in studying Indian civilization.